What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. And today we're talking about X-Men 97. Was the cartoon so good that it made me buy the cabinet? Okay, so season 1 of X-Men 97 is all wrapped up over on Disney Plus. You can go over there and check it out. Today we're going to talk about my overall impressions of the show, the first season. Of course, there will be spoilers, just so you know. We're not going to go into a super deep dive of every single episode, but I want to give you just my overall thoughts and impressions and some of the things that were maybe disappointments. But let's go ahead and just start with the overall series. Episode 1, right off the bat, it really sets the stage for what you're going to be in for. This is definitely a continuation of that original series. It takes place 1 year after the end of the X-Men series. 1996 is when it ended chronologically. So that's why they're calling this X-Men 97, sort of picking up the very next year, kind of where the story left off. And you find the X-Men where they were without Professor Xavier, trying to figure out, what they're doing, where they're going, how they're moving forward. But they're not completely immature and tearing each other apart. You still got the same Cyclops Wolverine struggle back and forth, that love triangle with Jean Grey. She's pregnant now, and if you pay attention to what's going on in the comics, you know who that baby grows up to be. I'll leave that little tidbit for you to check out in the show, in the series. But the characters are there, the voice actors are there. Some of the voices have aged a little bit. Wolverine specifically, he sounds a little bit different, but come on, this was a show that, took place 30 years ago, so we can give them a little bit of a break when it comes to that stuff. But overall, it feels very much the same. The animation is absolutely better. They've definitely upped their game on that, so that is good. And I really felt right at home. I really love the fact that they took the time to make Cyclops awesome. I mean, he is absolutely awesome. In that first episode when he does that hero landing, it's just incredible. If you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, check it out if you're a Cyclops fan. He just really is done well. I just love the way that they handled his character. It goes on, and there's a lot of cool references, sort of callbacks to the original show. There's this one episode where Jubilee is sucked into a video game, and there's a ton of references to the Konami X-Men game from the 90s, and that was just, a beat 'em up, a game that I absolutely love. I made my 6-player cabinet, using that game, using the HD remake of that game. Love that game, absolutely adore that game. And that game is directly referenced in that episode. There's a lot of little Easter eggs. If you're paying attention, you know what I'm talking about. So that was really cool. Overall, I mean, it goes along well. There's some twists and turns. The fact that Magneto is now, he was willed the school, Xavier's school, for mutants. That was his death decree. So this comes out at the end of that first episode, and he's kind of taking the reins. And he actually turned out to be kind of a good guy in the beginning, but of course Magneto's got his manipulation going on in the background. So there's a lot of plot twists and interesting things going on there. Really didn't feel like any character was disgraced or underutilized or completely twisted and changed in such a way that you can't recognize the character. Everybody gets their props. It's not a super Wolverine focused season, which is probably good, because overall in the MCU, or not in the MCU, actually in the Fox X-Men universe, Wolverine has been the focus. So it was kind of nice to maybe not have him be the focus. He's definitely a supporting character for sure, but there's a lot for the other characters to do as far as story wise. So overall, I like it. Like I said, there are some twists and turns. Xavier comes back. That didn't really seem that forced. I mean, in the comic books, this stuff happens all the time, but he does come back, and then you kind of have that. You have the Magneto, Charles Xavier back and forth, and I always dig that. That's a great thing. They have a new baddie, they defeat the baddie and all that. There are teasers in the future for upcoming stuff. They tease Apocalypse, and it's just it's going to be, I can't wait for X-Men 98, or maybe they're just going to call it X-Men 97, but just keep this going with different seasons. So maybe keep the show the same. I don't know if they're going to change it to 98. There shouldn't be that much of a time jump, I don't think. But overall, I really enjoyed the show. It's very much in the spirit of those cartoons. It's got a little bit of an edge to it. It's time appropriate, so you're seeing stuff from the 90s in there that's very appropriate to the 90s. I like the fact that it is still in the 90s, so you don't have some of those modern conveniences that kind of get you out of sticky situations. Everybody doesn't have a smartphone in their pocket with access to the internet, so that can kind of, sometimes that kind of make for a less interesting story. Overall, I liked it. Really did. Probably an 8 out of 10 for me. Really good show. There's one issue I had. There's one problem. There's one thing that they did, they touched on, and for one, I'm glad that they did it, but it should have gotten a little bit more love. Really should have gotten a little bit more love. This is my number one gripe with the entire show. At the very end of the second, or this, episode 9, right, second to last episode, Wolverine has a traumatic experience. Now, if you're familiar with the comics at all, there was a point. This is issue 75, back in November of 1993. This was a huge moment in the X-Men comics, especially with Wolverine's character in particular. And it gave us, it just kind of changed the story a little bit as far as Wolverine, who seemed sort of indestructible, but the healing factor and the adamantium skeleton and all that. Magneto, as in this issue here, you can see, this is when Magneto tore the adamantium from Wolverine's skeleton, unbonded it from his skeleton, from his bones. Now, he has the healing factor that makes him, he can take a bunch of damage and heal very quickly, but the metal on the bones made him very, very strong. You can't break his bones because they're coated in adamantium. That was a huge thing in the comics. It was so traumatic for Wolverine in this comic that Jean Grey and Professor X had to work together to keep his mind together because the pain was so excruciating and the trauma was so bad that his healing factor was having trouble keeping up with repairing all the damage as was happening because it was just so much. It was a long, elongated scene. This was an entire book just after the event, just after the adamantium is ripped from his bones. That is like a blip on the screen in this show. It's not really given the attention that it should have been given. It happens to him at the end of episode 9, and then they reference it. Episode 10, he's laying on just a gurney. He's in a hospital room. The way it happened in the comics is much more traumatic because it happens on some other planet, and they've got to get back in the spaceship and go back to Earth, and they don't have the right amount of support to help his body heal. So it was radically crazy different. And then at the end of that, they're back on Earth in the comics, right? In the comics, they go back to Earth. He eventually heals up, and then he's got to prove himself, he wants to be back on. He wants to prove himself to be a good member of the team. And that's when we find out in the comics that his claws are bone. And this is the first time this happened back in 93. This happens later on in the movies and stuff. But in the show, it's just sort of glossed over that it happened, and he's in intensive care, and that's it. They don't really go back into. You don't see him in the danger room. You don't see the reveal of the bone claws, and maybe that's the way they're going to kick off the next season, which kind of makes sense. But it just happens just so quickly, and it really should have been given a lot more attention. The majority of that episode really should have been centered around that. It's a very traumatic thing, huge in the comics. So I don't like the way that was handled. Very, very just dismissive. The other minor gripe I had, and it's funny, I like seeing it, but I don't know why. At the very end, I guess this is probably episode 9 or 8. I think it's the end of episode 8, maybe the beginning of episode 9. The team, X-Men, they change into their original uniforms, their costumes, from the X-Men that you'll recognize in the Konami game, the arcade game. So it's older. They're older uniforms, and I get to see Wolverine in the brown and the yellow, and that's my favorite outfit, my favorite uniform, my favorite costume that he ever had was that color scheme, and I always dug that brown and yellow look. But I don't know why they did it. I'm glad they did it, but they change into these older versions of their uniforms, and I don't know why they did that. But anyway, that was a small griping complaint. So how does this factor into Arcade1up's, partnership with X-Men 97? And did that actually influence me to buy the cabinet? Well, I talked about how this cabinet, this X-Men 97 cabinet, I think overall was a win. It was a miss on the art side because there really wasn't a lot of focus on the games that were included. You walk into the cabinet, you can't really see and tell what the games are on the cabinet. Also, I thought they were the wrong games. You should have had, the Konami X-Men game from the 90s should have been on that cabinet. But overall, I thought the cabinet was a win. But I wasn't going to buy it. I did buy it. I did, after watching this show, I dug the show, and I did buy the cabinet. So that cabinet's going to be here next week sometime. Expect a review of that cabinet. but also expect that that cabinet is not going to stay stock. While the show was great, the show didn't necessarily make me buy this cabinet. An idea that I have to mod that cabinet is why I bought the cabinet, but the show definitely helped. So, end of the day, I think the show was great. 8 out of 10, go check it out. I did buy the X-Men 97 cabinet from Arcade1up and look for that review, but also look for that cabinet to change and I think become the better version of itself. The thing that Arcade1up should have built to pay homage to what is really a pretty good cartoon and a great continuation of the story from X-Men 96. Now, X-Men 97. Anyway, jump down in the comment section. Let me know what you think about the show and the cabinet and my purchasing of the cabinet. I can't wait to hear all those positive comments from you. Anyway, thank you so much for stopping by and checking out the channel. You have a blessed day, and I'll see all of you next time.